This is the poetry revision video for Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney for the Weejek Poetry Anthology. So, some information first of all about Seamus Heaney. During his life he was Ireland's most celebrated living poet, awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in '95, and lots of his poems contain reference to nature. He was a very natural poet. He talked about the environment and its effect on man, and also kind of memory and its effect on his memory. And his poems contain lots of intricate small details that trigger these memories. So in the poem Death of a Naturalist you'll see his childhood memories explored and the kind of details that he can remember. And the poem Death of a Naturalist, it focuses on a childhood experience from Heaney and his memories of being really interested in nature as a child and being encouraged in nature by one of his teachers, and kind of going out and collecting frog spawn, and then his reaction when he revisits that scene and some of the frog spawn that was left has turned into frogs and they are angry, and it's almost like he feels like they are attacking him, almost as if the frogs are taking revenge on him. And if you refer to the title Death of a Naturalist being someone who studies nature, who is interested in animals and interested in how nature works, and in this case that negative experience that the poet has causes him to go off nature and causes him to go off being a naturalist. So the death referred to is metaphorical. It's not a real death, it's not a physical death, but it's almost like the death of childhood dreams, the death of childhood hopes, and also the death of innocence, and this idea that the kind of realities of life and the realities of growing up, almost like a kind of a rite of passage or a coming of age poem. So the poem is also about growing up as well, and loss of enthusiasm, and that transition from innocence to experience, and what he sees, and kind of builds up his experience in life. So I won't go into too much detail in terms of annotating the poem, but I will pick out some things that are quite interesting that you could write about. This first section of the poem, there are lots of negative words, so you could have a lexical field of words that have negative connotations. So you can see festered, meaning to kind of rot and smell, which links with the word rotted here, and sweltered. And then you've got punishing sun, and this kind of use of onomatopoeia here, how the bubbles are gargling. So all of these words combine to make a negative connotations, a negative image in the reader or the listener's mind, and you get the impression that it's kind of a hot day and the sun is out, and it's that's part of the childhood memory of being going out and collecting frog spawn in the summer, and the heat. Those small details kind of making an impression of him, and then all of this kind of negative language that starts the poem foreshadows the events of what's to come afterwards. Now, even though you've got this kind of negative language, there are elements of beauty, and there are things that the poet finds beautiful. So you've got the dragonflies and butterflies, so some kind of that kind of juxtaposition of beauty in amongst this decay. But you've got some absolutely fantastic language when you think about the adjectives used here. So the warm and thick, and then this slobber, this frog spawn that grew like clotted water. So that adjective there, clotted, has connotations of blood clots, of something that's congealing. So you can just imagine this kind of watery scene, and then this frog spawn that's that's there, and it's thick and it's clotting there in the water. Beautiful, beautiful descriptions. As the poem moves on, you can talk about the alliteration there, use of jam pots of jellied, and here you have kind of memories of childhood, memories of innocence and kind of and purity, and here the poet demonstrates his interest in nature and his kind of keenness and eagerness, and he's there on the windowsills at home and on the shelves at school, and he's waiting and watching until these fattening dots burst. So there's a sense of anticipation. A sense of anticipation that something interesting is going to happen, something good is going to happen, and that he's finding kind of joy in this. He's finding glee in this, and you can see that, you know, on the shelves at school, he's encouraged in this by this teacher, Miss Walls, and Miss Walls is explaining the facts of life, and this is about the transition to through teenage years to adulthood. And you've got this childlike language, and also this kind of Irish vocabulary. So you've got the kind of childishness of daddy, and then childishness also, but also the kind of this Irish language of mammy. So the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. So you can see the teacher is basically explaining the facts of life to the children, and using the frog spawn to teach them this. So then the daddy frog, obviously signs of masculinity and signs of kind of protection, and he's there and he's croaking, and then that kind of foreshadows also the noise that's used a little bit later on. And then this mammy frog, this Irish colloquialism, is responsible for laying all of these hundreds of eggs. And linking to nature, so how the animals, or how the creatures in the poem, how the creatures in nature is reflected in the rest of the environment, in the rest of nature as well. You could tell the weather by the frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in rain. Okay, so linking there, you've got some pathetic fallacy used to set this scene. And that's the first stanza of this poem, Death of a Naturalist. So in terms of structure, you could talk about how there are two stanzas. This first one shows the childish enthusiasm and the innocence, and also the memories. So this is the poet as an adult thinking back to his childhood memories. As we move on to the second stanza, so the break in stanzas indicates a change in time, and time has moved on, and the poet goes back to the scene where he collected the frog spawn, and you can see again pathetic fallacy setting the scene, one hot day. So whilst you can imagine the kind of he was expecting to go back and feel exactly the same and have the joy there of going back, but when he gets there, of course, it's very, very different, and there are these angry frogs. So, you know, I think again of the adjectives that are used to describe these creatures. And there's lots of militaristic terminology, a lexical field, if you like, of militaristic terminology. Because these angry frogs have invaded the Flax Dam. And you know, the use of onomatopoeia, the use of noise to set the scene. So the air was thick with a bass chorus. So a chorus meaning lots of frogs all croaking in unison, and bass, this very deep, almost a very angry, potentially for this child a very frightening sound. And then more militaristic language here, the bellied frogs were cocked on sod, so cocked as if it's a weapon, if it's a gun. And their loose necks pulsed like sails. So that verb pulse there, you can imagine how they're kind of necks, they're breathing in and out, and they are pulsing, writhing. This child is frightened by something that's natural, but it's something that's beyond his experience, and it's the first time, and it shocks him and it frightens him. So some hopped, almost on the attack, maybe. More onomatopoeia, slap and plop. So interesting sounds that they are making, negative sounds, and obscene threats. So an element of personification there. These frogs are threatening this child. Some sat, poised like mud grenades. So they are ready for action. They are ready to go off at any second. And then grenades, again carrying on this militaristic terminology, this militaristic metaphor. And these animals who are ready to attack, these creatures who are ready to attack, are dangerous, indicated by blunt heads. And quite an amusing poem, quite a funny poem, because you get this kind of language to make people think and make people amused. The onomatopoeia of farting. That could be how a child would imagine it. He would imagine the noise that's being made to sound like someone farting. And that's the memory that sticks with this poet. So you can see here some triadic structure. He was sickened, turned, and ran. Okay, so very, very kind of swift movements. This child moves out of the way and kind of leaves the scene. And then a brilliant description here. So first of all, adjectives: great slime and the great slime kings. So that suggests that these creatures have majesty about them. It suggests that they have power. They are powerful creatures, and that is what adds to the fear of the child. And they are gathered for vengeance. So it's almost like the poet, when he was a child, knew that he'd done something wrong, and knew that he would be in trouble, and knew that he perhaps would be punished for it by the frogs. And it's almost the element that even if he runs away, he is now frightened by the frog spawn. If he touches the frog spawn again, if he dipped his hand in that spawn, it would clutch it. It would never let go. Just as these memories of what happened, just as he has never let go of these memories, he kind of imagines that this spawn would never let go. He would never be able to kind of wash it off from his hands. So the themes of the poem then is man and the natural world, and man's place in the natural world, and perhaps how man thinks he can control the natural world, has a right over the natural world, and can do what he wants with it. But ultimately, these kind of nature and these creatures are uncontrollable, and they will react very instinctively, and kind of punish people that do them wrong, so to speak. It's also about sex. I say it's about growing up and loss of innocence, and you've got that idea of the teacher explaining the facts of life, and then the poet experiencing the harsh reality of life, which changes him from this innocent child into his teenage years, which is why he kind of loses his interest in being a naturalist. And it's about innocence and loss of innocence and transformation. Which is quite interesting. It's about a physical transformation of tadpoles, frogs spawn into tadpoles and tadpoles into frogs. But then it's about a metaphorical transformation. It's about a transformation of this young, innocent child into a more experienced, more mature teenager, moving into a more experienced and more mature adult who is obviously remembering back to his childhood experiences. I said about structure, two main sections of blank verse, so no rhyming couplets at the end of the lines. And the first section, Heaney is describing how the frogs would spawn, and there's a digression. He goes off, kind of triggers a memory about him collecting the spawn, and also about how the teacher encourages this childish interest. And then the second section, Heaney records how he hears this strange noise and goes to investigate, and it's this army of frogs that have taken over, gathering for revenge on him. And there's that ominous, dramatic language, increasing fear and the anticipation that something is going to happen. That first stanza foreshadows and builds up, and there's anticipation that something is going to happen, something perhaps bad. And there's that semantic field, or a lexical field, you can use either of those terms, about war and weaponry, and this childlike imagination and fear. And there's lots of not childish language, but childlike language, as the poet remembers. So talk about the mammy frog and the daddy frog, and also the experience of remembering his primary school teacher. And at first, of course, the lexicon, the collection of words, full of terms for putrefaction, rotting, and festering, and kind of odor, which is excrement or feces. This, you can imagine the smell and the heat, and just the decay of what's going on. Really, really unpleasant language, festered and rotted, and slobber and clotted water, rank with cow dung and slime kings. Okay, so it could be that the negative experience he has affected his use of language, and he's using negative language now because that's how he remembers that particular incident, as being negative. So if you could compare this to another poem, another good poem that I would choose is To Autumn, because initially they are both poems that are about nature. And think about the similarities. Both poems show a love of nature, when Miss Walls would tell us. So the kind of interest there as a child, and the great slime kings, and talking about the dragonflies and the spotted butterflies. And that compares really well with this love of nature in To Autumn, of the seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness, and the rosy hue and the winnowing wind. And then there's this idea of things coming to an end. In autumn, obviously moving towards the end of that season, think not of them. And then in Death of a Naturalist is innocence that's coming to an end. And then I've got rich imagery in both poems. The flax dam festered and sweltered, and warm thick slobber, and slap, plop, and obscene. And then in To Autumn, swell the gourd and plump the hazel shell, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. So compare the rich imagery there. Both poems use alliteration, coarse croaking and winnowing wind. Both poems use onomatopoeia, slap and plop and winnowing and oozings. And there's some differences. To Autumn is about the end of a season during the year, whereas Death of a Naturalist is about the end of childhood, the loss of innocence. It's also about the fear of change. And the poem and the poet doesn't want things, almost wants to stay, this innocent child, doesn't want things to change. It's also about the personal memory of youth. And it has this fearful and sinister tone at the end when this army of frogs invade, this coarse croaking and the slap and plop and the obscene threats. Whereas To Autumn is more laid back, it's more mellow, there's a more mellow and contented tone. It's a much more gentle, pleasant atmosphere, the winnowing wind and the oozings and the rosy hue. Whereas Death of a Naturalist has this mixing of senses, so the warm, thick slobber, and use that word jellied. So to finish, just some questions that you might want to think about or ask yourself when revising Death of a Naturalist, which is about how far does this poem tell the truth about frogs, and how far does it tell the reader about the power of imagination? So is it an accurate representation of what happened, or have the poet's memories been distorted by this negative event? Have they been distorted by time as he has grown up? Would somebody else remember it in a similar or different way? Is this poem a comic poem because of some of the language used? Is it a serious poem? because of what actually happened and how it affected the poet? Or is it both? How far does the poet invite us to laugh at him? Is he mocking himself? Is he looking back at himself as a child and mocking what he did as a child? How truthful is the title, Death of a Naturalist? Did it really kill off his interest in being a naturalist? Did he lose that love of nature? Or does the poem record only a dramatic change of attitude? Or is it something else? Okay, so questions for you to think about for your revision. That's the end of the analysis of Death of a Naturalist. Hope you find that useful. Thank you and good luck in your exams.